we all live in the flesh. I mean, that's a part of life. That's just where we are. And there's no place that you can take your flesh and get it somewhere and just get out of this rat race that we're in. You just can't do that. The warfare is not after the flesh. Sometimes people go to a monastery, thinking if they can get off in a monastery, somehow that then they can be holy. I heard about a man who went to a monastery, and this monastery had the regimen, the discipline of silence. They could only say 2 words a year. And this man went to a monastery, and finally he came to a superior after a whole year there in the monastery, and he said, all right, you have 2 words, what do you want to say? He said, bed hard. Thank you, go back. He came back the second year, he said, well, you've got 2 more words. What do you want to say? He said, food bad. So going back. Came back the third year, he said, you've got 2 words, what do you want to say? He said, I quit. And he said, well, you might as well quit. All you've done is complain for 3 years. There's no way that the flesh can overcome this. Though we live in the flesh, we don't war in the flesh. He's talking here about our weakness of our flesh. Listen, we do not fight with flesh and blood because we don't fight against flesh and blood. You have to understand that. Remember Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 13. Finally, brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. That's the reason he says here in verse 3, though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. The problem, folks, is the mind. As a man thinketh, so is he. Out of the heart, out of the mind are the issues of life. Now let's move to the third and final thing. What I've talked about is the warfare of our foe. The devil tries to conquer our minds. What I've talked about is the weakness of our flesh. We don't have what it takes to overcome and to win this battle. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. Now here's the third thing. I want you to see, folks, the weapons of our fight. The weapons of our fight. What are they? He mentions them. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. Paul said, I'm coming against this citadel. I'm coming against this. Notice, if you will, here, as he talks about what he's coming against, here says, and if you will, in verse 4. He speaks there in verse 4 of strongholds. Do you see that? He says, mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. What is a stronghold? It's a fortress. Walls of resistance are going to come down. What kind of resistance are in the hearts and minds of the Corinthians? Well, arrogance, ignorance, despair. These are the strongholds. Inside that stronghold are demonic thoughts, organized, mobilized. The demonized armies of hell are inside that stronghold. Paul says that is coming down. And then he mentions high things. Do you see that? Look, if you will, in verse 5, casting down every high thing. Now, here's a citadel, and it's got these towers, all around these towers. Paul said, I'm going to pull down these walls. I'm going to get at those of you who are on the inside. And Paul says, I'm going to decimate your towers. What's he talking about there? He's talking about not intelligence, but intellectualism, high-minded attitudes, sophistication. Paul said, that's coming down. And then he said, inside there's some captives. He said, I'm going to take those captives captive. He says, I'm going to bring into captivity every thought. Thoughts that are being held hostage. I am going to war. Not in his own flesh.